Richard Rieser, Islington North CLP. Understand why people are fixed on the issue of selection, and that's important, and I think we need to sort that out. But I would want to speak that the Democracy Review represents much more of a change in our party than that. I've been to 4 meetings during the consultation to argue for the role of disabled people in the party. If we reject this report, we'll be putting us back another year, and we don't think another year is good enough. As it is, the rule changes to have an annual conference will come to next year's conference. If we put it back, it will be the year after, and then there'll be some other reason. It's not good enough. 13 million disabled people in this country. This party needs to be the party that speaks for disabled people. If we can capitalise on that, we can get a majority government of a large extent. We're always looking backwards. We need to look forwards. With an ageing population, more and more people develop impairments. There are many, many people at this conference with visible impairments, but there are many more with hidden impairments, mental health issues, various other things. They have a right to be properly represented. At the moment, it's very difficult to get those views forward. The Democracy Review is creating a space for us within the party to have a conference, to bring 2 motions to this conference, and to have an NEC member. These are important steps forward. The other issue will continue to be an issue, but I would say let us not throw that out, including the same structure for BAME, making officers like myself, local disability officer, executive and voting members. At the moment we're not allowed to vote, though we do a lot of the work in our constituency executive. All of these things are actually discriminatory, and if someone chose to, could actually challenge the party the way it operates at the moment. We cannot allow that to go on. So while I understand the issues on selection, and we must carry on fighting for those, it is too big an issue to throw all of the other things out by referencing this back. I thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Matt? Yep.
Gosh, there's a lot of you when looking from this side. Niki Fitzgerald, Islington North. I'm not going to speak about card vote 8, just for a little bit of variety. I'd like to first of all welcome a lot of this Democracy Review, which I feel, I hope, is going to be having inclusion of BAME, of disability, of LGBTQ, and of women members. I hope that we will see that as a starting point, inclusion as the starting point for policies, not just an add-on. I hope that this will also be the starting point for us avoiding those ignorant gaffes committed by people for whom inclusion not so much of an issue. And in this vein, I'd just like to call your attention to, in this card vote section 2, page 33, referring to the branch women's officer. If I've read it right in the short time I've had to get to grips with this lengthy bad boy, if I've read it right, it mandates a women's officer, yay, to be there. However, it continues to only mandate that 2 officers be women. This is diluting the number of women mandating to be officers. So I would call on the CAC and for this to be reviewed, must be looked at, because we must be having inclusion always as the starting point and always moving forward to more inclusion, not less. Thank you.
I spoke on a reference back, but I hope it's in order to speak in the general debate, if that's all right. Yes? Okay, thank you. My name's Richard Rieser, Islington North. I've been an educationalist for 45 years, specialising really in developing inclusion around both the country and the world, and a lot of training on that. And what I want to say is that academies are bad news for disabled children and those with SEN. The recent labour force study, which looks at the workforce across our schools in England, showed that between 2014 and 2017, there had been a reduction of 6,000 full-time posts of support teaching assistants. and that is when the population of the secondary schools has gone up by 300,000. So clearly we're seeing the effects of funding reductions, but also the academies refusing to take and keep large numbers of children with SEND. And where are they going? Well, the Select Committee on Exclusions, Education Select Committee reported on exclusions in July, and it's identified a whole series of places that mainly children with SEN, but also children with other issues, are going. 300,000 plus temporary exclusions and over 6,000 permanent exclusions from our schools in just the last year. A further 100,000 children off-rolled in one place or another just so that they avoid Ofsted inspections, and it's nearly always the children with SEN and some sort of learning difficulty who are put out of the school illegally. The department knows it's illegal, but they do nothing about it. Large numbers put into alternative provision, and surprise, surprise, who are the people who are bidding most for alternative provision? There are more free schools now running alternative provision than anything else. There is a huge growth in free schools for special education, as well as a growth in independent schools, charging up to £150,000 per pupil per year. And where's that coming from? It's coming from the same £6 billion budget for special education needs, the higher needs budget, which is meant to meet the needs of all of the children with higher needs. So each time you take 150,000 out of that per year, it leaves less money for everybody else. There is enough money to make it work, but not if we allow children to be excluded and excluded and excluded. We have to build a better system, an inclusive system, and that's why I support the school motion, because it talks about an alternative, and it's also very important that we learn the lessons of the past. In the last Labour government, from 1997 to 2006, they were committed to inclusion. After that, they changed their mind. In fact, Lord Adonis, who was Minister for Schools in 2007, went to the Select Committee and he said, Labour, we don't have a policy of inclusion. So we need to learn the lessons of that, because if we are going to have a system that's inclusive, we've got to stick to it, we've got to develop the methods of actually making it work, we've got to train all of our staff, teachers, support staff and so on, and we've got to fund it properly, and we want no more children excluded and forced into crime and mental health issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Conference comrades, Ben Hayes, Islington North CLP Youth Delegate. This amendment seeks to help our conference operate in a clear and consistent way as possible. Standing orders from the NEC will mean that not only can we go into conference with some real knowledge about the week's debates, but we have a solid basis for the mechanics of procedures such as car votes, emergency motions, remittance, etc. This is a common practice in CLPs across the country, as I'm sure you're aware. Also the trade union movement, I know in my own experience in my trade union Unite, it's always helped the conference to operate in a fair and effective way. I mean, this is particularly important given the growth we've had in membership over the last few years. We've all seen this week the fantastic new delegates who are clearly eager to get stuck into our party's processes and have their say. So I think it's important we have sort of as much clarity and we assist that as much as we possibly can. This is my first time as a delegate, and even as someone who has followed the ins and outs of the Labour Party, we've spending much more time doing that than I care to mention. There have been sort of parts of the week, especially early on in the conference, that are sort of quite difficult to follow and could seem a bit kind of alienating. I'm aware that I'm aware that over the course of the conference, hearing all the sort of bold, radical, exciting policies from our front bench team, all the excellent stories from delegates, that this sort of stuff can seem a bit sort of dry and underwhelming. But given conference is quite rightly the sovereign decision-making process for this party, I mean, it's crucial that we do our utmost to make sure it reflects the kind of democratic, open, effective values that we want to put forward to the party as a whole. And I think, given our Chancellor kicked off the debate on the economy yesterday, we're very fitting quite for Bill Shankly. I think it's only right that I mention my own sort of personal political hero, Arsene Wenger, who said that You quite rightly said that the most inspirational words you can give anyone in coaching are "I trust you." I think it's important that we trust our delegates to make our policy and shape the agenda for this party by giving them the tools required, and to make sure that this conference is the most effective springboard possible for going out and campaigning to get the man who we in Islington North CLP are very proud and privileged to have had as our MP for 35 years, Jeremy Corbyn, as our next Prime Minister. So I think this is just sort of one small step to making sure that conference is as effective as possible in setting the agenda for our party, and that all delegates can kind of have their say and understand what's happening. We have transparency, consistency and clarity. Let's do our bit to make sure that this is the case as much as possible next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ruth Hayes speaking on behalf of Unite. I'm, like many people, a first-time delegate to this conference. I'm a branch secretary of a branch which represents advice workers, those who work in independent advice agencies, law centres, citizens' advice. And I'd like to speak on the Justice and Home Affairs report and on legal aid. Conference, yesterday we heard speaker after speaker talk about the way in which austerity has devastated our communities. Food banks, cuts to youth services, rise in mental health issues, poverty, wages and homelessness. However, we've also heard about how communities are taking practical action to support each other and to provide solidarity. In my own union, we have the Period Dignity campaign. Disabled people's organisations are taking action against universal credit. Young people fighting for rights at work in restaurants and hotels. A sector where we were told people wouldn't join unions. They were wrong. They did. Legal aid has been cut to ribbons by the Tories. For example, in 2009, there were over 132,000 housing cases funded through legal aid. This has fallen by 70%, 7-0, at a time when there's a massive housing crisis. There's now a growing skills shortage amongst lawyers and advice workers, and a lack of capacity as the market has failed. The Legal Aid Agency had to go out to tender 3 times in the last year because it simply did not receive enough expressions of interest from potential legal aid providers. We've heard how lack of early legal help has left people without assistance, literally leaving them with no income, no home, no ability to resolve their immigration status. The speakers on the Windrush scandal have shown what happens when people are denied independent legal advice. It leads to the obscenity of people left in limbo and excluded from their own homes. Previously, I've campaigned for Labour and I've had to say people should vote for us because we're not as bad as the Tories. Today, I'm proud to say that Labour has a programme which will build on our traditions of solidarity and transform society. A proposal which reimagines what justice could look like, with education so that people know their rights, with community-based services developing good quality jobs for people with lived experience of the problems that need tackling, creating local, face-to-face services which provide the help which people really need to exercise those rights. This will make sure that bad employers and poor landlords don't continue to get away with it. It will also make sure that systemic poor decision-making by state agencies such as the DWP is tackled and made fit for purpose. It will put money back into the pockets of those on the lowest incomes and regenerate communities from the grassroots. Our policies will make justice for all a reality, tackling the imbalance of power to benefit the many, not the few.
Thank you. Hello, Conference. Niki Fitzgerald, Islington North, junior doctor, proud to have been on the picket lines 2 years ago fighting for a safe and fair contract. Thank you. 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 Than I am here to make two pleas to the National Policy Forum, particularly in relation to the Health MPF. The first plea is about inclusion and equality, and the second plea for an integrated policy framework that will better address the social determinants of health. Let me first come to the question of inclusion. As a first-time delegate or visitor to conference, I have been delighted to see the disabled members, the women members, the BAME members, the LGBTQ members called to speak at this platform. However, I'm sad to say that that inclusion here is not reflected in the MPF document that we have. I'm specifically referring to a paragraph on page 61, which states, "When planning new services, it is important that these groups are," and I quote, "considered." This is not good enough, really. Inclusion should be a starting point for all policy, not an afterthought considered at the end. This brings me to my next point about an integrated policy framework. What struck me about reading the whole MPF is just how many silos it was. I was so excited to see that the health section was called Tackling Health Inequality. It's a particular passion of mine. But it left me feeling that some of it had kind of missed the point, because to me, tackling health inequality in a public health sense means addressing the social determinants of health, a concept coined and developed by Professor Sir Michael Marmot, who we are so lucky to have working down in London in University College. His work shows that there is a gradient. Health is on a gradient from rich to poor. And it shows that it is the conditions in which you are born, in which you grow, in which you are educated, in which you live and work, which determine your health far more than anything else, far more than anything I will ever do for you as a doctor. To put it another way, in our future Labour government, it is John McDonnell and John Healey, far more, I'm sorry, than John Ashworth, who will dictate our health. Sorry, John. Don't get me wrong, I have been amazed and inspired by the policy of all of these Johns, inclusion, but to maximise the potential for benefit to our nation's health, it must be integrated with public health workers in the Treasury, in the Department of Health, in education, everywhere. So, in the end conference, I really support and do welcome John's pledges. I also support the reference back because as a doctor on the front line, we urgently need a fully funded, universal, publicly owned, publicly provided NHS, free at the point of use for everybody in this country. But if we are rebuilding this country, if we are rebuilding Britain, as I'm hearing from conference we are going to do, let's do it right first time with inclusive and integrated policies. Thank you.
Thank you to all our speakers. Did you feel the passion and energy in the room? Point of order. Where? Can't see it.